So this one's, I guess, a bit different. As Lucky said, it's just something I've always wanted to try. Uh, and this particular opportunity sort of fell into the image analysis wheelhouse. Um, so I'll just give a bit of introduction about with some context about what this is all about. So, wait, slides here. Yeah. So essentially, the whole history around behind this is, I'm sure if many people will be aware, like in 7980, Mount Vesuvius, there's a big volcanic eruption, and then it sort of buried like a couple of a lot of cities, I guess, around in Italy. And I think the two main cities, from what I remember, understand, is Pompeii and Herculaneum. And so it was like a massive volcanic eruption, and like everything got like a lot of the city and a lot of the artifacts around that got buried. And then what happened was around 1750, I think a farmer discovered this sort of a library. It's called the Villa of Papyri at Herculaneum, and this particular city is called Herculaneum. And what they discovered was this library was actually in a villa, and this villa, they think it is supposed to be built by Julius Caesar's father-in-law. But anyway, the point was, the main thing is that they had a big library there, and the library survived. And what happened is, because there was a massive volcanic eruption, the intense heat of the lava actually carbonized a lot of the scrolls. And when I say scrolls, these are like papyrus. I believe they're like plant-based materials, I think. Like so, everything was written on these scrolls. So this library had all these scrolls in there, and not books, I guess, older versions of books. And these scrolls got carbonized. And when I say carbonized, they essentially got like burnt crisp, but they sort of like were preserved in a way. Um, and this on the left, you see like a small plan or snippet of the villa on the left bottom. And so what happened was, I sort of like, when I was looking into why this was really such like, such a big deal, like be able to discover this, it's one of the big things was this was on record one of the largest singular sort of ancient libraries that have survived. They may have like library and scrolls from different places, but this is probably one place where you had all these different, I guess, piece of history all together in one place. At this one place, and that's why this is quite a significant discovery. So if you keep in mind, it's discovered in 1750, and there were a lot of attempts to sort of, so it's a scroll, literally like a scroll, and they wanted to unroll it. Problem was, because this was burnt, it would just break down. So there were a lot of people who tried over the years to sort of painstakingly unroll it over like even decades. I think some monks tried, and they were able to get some idea of what the language and alphabets and stuff are, but still, there's like, I think from what I read, there were around 600 that are still unopened and unreadable. So I think one of the questions that came about, and this is like in 2000, I guess, 13 or so, or maybe I don't remember the exact year, but around 2013 or 2015, I think one of the questions was, can we use technology really to, look into these scrolls? Can we see what's in there? And this one particular researcher, Brent Seals from the University of Kentucky, they pioneered the use of X-ray tomography and, then computer vision or software to actually X-ray tomography to scan the scrolls, and then software to then read what's inside them. And they showed this from some scrolls which were obtained from the Dead Sea region of Israel. And then I believe the idea was, then can we use this sort of approach to then look at these Vesuvius scrolls? So these scrolls are called Vesuvius scrolls, by the way. So what happened is, in 2003, this Vesuvius challenge was launched, and it was like a 1 million plus prize pool, um, which is pretty insane when I saw that number. And this is sort of like, when you go to the website, this is what you'd see: resurrect an ancient library. And in that year, a team of three won the first prize, and they won around 700K, the winning team. So it is a pretty big deal. And using this sort of their approach, they were able to be able to unwrap and then start reading the scrolls. Uh, and I think the next question was like, where on earth are they getting all this money from? And well, it's mostly a lot of tech entrepreneurs, from what I can tell. So the Natalie Friedman, ex GitHub CEO, I believe, put initial funding for launch, and then it followed a few of tech entrepreneurs, then sort of followed suit. And like one of the things was like the catch. I guess there's a good like sales or PR for this in the sense that you're saying there's you're reading a library no one has opened for 2000 years, and I was surprised that like I mean not, perhaps not a surprise, but it's like fundable at scale. You get all these people investing money in it, and I think the Musk Foundation contributed, and the way they sort of justified or framed the contribution was it's in favor of civilizational enlightenment. Um, and I guess funny comment or not so funny comment is no one's going to say that about a cell segmentation benchmark. But anyway, joke ended there. But I think one thing to keep in mind is like there was no research funding or anything here. It was purely philanthropy driven. So I found this spread quite interesting, the where the money comes from, and I always like to look into that. All right, so. I said Vesuvius competition, right? So this competition was hosted on this platform called Kaggle. For those who are not familiar with Kaggle, it's Kaggle is like this data science competition platform, and they also have this big community where you can also learn a lot of like machine learning and data science concepts. They have some really nice run through notebooks you can go through. It's owned by Google, from what I understand. And the general idea is like what I participated in was in a code competition. So essentially, what you do is you submit uh, code or models, deep learning models, or whatever you want, to this competition. The way it works is you have the host who's like hosting the competition. They have, for example, if it's let's say reading these scrolls, they may have like these training images and some ground truth data, and then there are some test data which you haven't seen. So essentially, what you do is you do all your sort of code experimentation analysis. Could be training a deep learning model to say, let's say, read the scroll on this training set. Then you train a model, you submit like Python code with the model to Kaggle, the platform, and they have like this test set or a hidden set of images which you haven't seen or which you don't know about, and they essentially will run your model on that and evaluate how well it works. And the competition usually has a metric, like how do you judge, like some sort of metric or some sort of I guess goal at the end, saying okay, if the goal is like the metric is like a dice score, for example, of one, that's sort of like if one is perfect, then you will be evaluated with that score essentially. So you submit the whole code to Kaggle, and Kaggle will run it in their sort of environment. So you just need to make sure it's all prepped for that. And essentially, you'll start seeing this big leaderboard of where everyone's you can be a part of a team of multiple people or one person, and you can see everyone like how they're stacked on the leaderboard, and you can see everyone's like separated by point zero zero points in terms of this the score. It's I found it pretty exciting just seeing that. And there is also a timeline for this. So I think this was over 3 months, and this one had a prize money. And I think one big sort of catch is also that they have this test data which you're evaluated against, but it's not all of it. You're only evaluated against say 30% during the competition time, and then the rest of the 70% is then I guess the for full score is revealed at the end of the competition. So what usually happens is everyone will start optimizing for the test data set, and you may overfit to that. But the moment it's evaluated on the entire set, you see this big shakeup of the leaderboard where people on the top will go down, some will go up. I found that quite interesting. And yeah, I think I'm sure I've done plenty of overfitting of models in our image analysis time here. But I found this whole like concept and this whole idea interesting. So this is the Kaggle competition. And this is how the Kaggle, the Vesuvius challenge surface, the pages. So this is the competition name is surface detection, and there's different sections talking about what this competition is about, the timeline, how much money there is, etc. By the way, feel free to interrupt me whenever. And yeah, this ran from November last year to February, end of February. And the goal, so with this whole scroll, the Vesuvius scrolls, the whole idea of how they've gone about reading this is they've sort of had this in 4 different steps. So what they do is they scan the scroll. This is this papyrus scroll using X-ray CT, synchrotron X-ray. I think so. They had different versions of it. I don't think the reason they went to synchrotron is you get a higher resolution, is my understanding, and the power of the beam, I guess. And once you scan it, it's essentially like a cylindrical sort of The scroll is a cylinder, like a wrapped cylinder in a way. So essentially, what you do is then you have to unwrap it. So you have to segment the sheet surface, which will then help unwrap it. Then you like flatten it, and then the goal is then detecting the ink, which the ink in itself is not that easy to detect, and there's a lot of software sort of algorithms that are used. So in 2023, they were able to read text from a scroll, and this is what, like, say, I guess success would look like. You have the scroll, and they unwrap the scroll here, and then once they did that, they were able to detect some of the ink as well. And this was like there was a lot of PR around this, on them being able to read what's finally inside in one of the scrolls. So this is like a overview of what the whole, like, for the scroll process, what it is. This is not, the competition was focusing on one element of this, um, and that's the segmentation. So when I say segment, when you scan the scroll, it's like it's essentially like, it's literally like it's a spiral in a way. So you scan that scroll up, and then one of the first goals is you want to identify where, or you want to trace, I guess, where the center of those pages are in a way. So on the bottom left is an example, like you can see these lines, orange lines overlaid as an example. And I think the best analogy is like in Fiji or Image, if you use the straighten plugin, you essentially, like, if it's a banana, you draw a line in the center of the banana and you can straighten the banana. I thought that is like a nice sort of analogy I could find in I guess, with software you're familiar with. Um, so so this is the challenge, is essentially segmentation, and this is a bottleneck in the process. Like, when they're doing this, trying to virtually unwrap and read the scroll, this is one of the big bottlenecks. And so what I was started exploring the data. Oh, I think the animation is on top of the initial bit. Sorry. Oh yeah, that's elastic. Yeah, okay. So I'll probably going backwards, but that's fine. So first thing I did was I want to look at Elastic. Maybe I'll just show what the data looks like first. So this is, so essentially we have all these, a bunch of TIFF images, and the white is showing the scrolls, like that's the individual sort of pages of the scroll, and the orange is the ground truth. That's saying this is the center, this is the center line of the scroll. So each of them is actually like a page of the scroll. So the goal is to be able to, if you're given that image, predict that, like literally predict the sheet as a continuous surface. And that's sort of the goal of this competition. So I think the first thing I sort of tried was, okay, let's see if we can use Elastic for this, right? That's what I'm familiar with. And as that I did, I separated in the foreground and background, and I could detect the sheets just fine, really. It was doing a good job detecting the sheets as this yellow and the background as a blue. And the sheet seemed obvious. The 3D topology looked good to me. But then I guess the more I looked into the challenge, I realized it's not the sheet that's the problem. It's being able to predict the center of the sheet. And it's the center of the sheet is not easy. Like, it's not very obvious what the center of the sheet really is. So sheet is an easier challenge. The center is a much harder challenge. And I think the way they sort of defined it is, I think there's like from what I understand, based on the pages, there's on one side there's the ink, and I think they're using that to sort of define what the front of that sheet is, and I believe that's how they sort of drawn this ground truth. Um, and that's what these blue lines represent, is the ground truth, or what the page is, or where the pages should be. So it's like around a 3 voxel line through the middle of each sheet. And the earlier was a more of a sparse example. Now look at something like this. This dense is crazy. I can see why this is a problem. And the images that are provided were um, sparse annotations. And what I mean by that is, not the entire volume is not annotated. They've only annotated like part of it. And that's a challenge with the annotation. And usually, I'm not saying usually, but sometimes it may end up in being in areas where it's easier to sort of tell where the separation is. And the harder areas to annotate may not be as annotated frequently. So, but which is with any annotations really, the harder it is, like, you probably do a lot more in the easier sections than the harder ones. But anyway, the point is, all the training data that they had and didn't have full annotation. Most of them didn't have full annotations. Only a part of the image was annotated. So yeah, these are all the image datasets are 3D cubes or blocks from around 6 different scrolls. So 6 different scrolls, they've sort of taken these images and sort of divided them into these cuboids or blocks. Around, I believe they're under 320 by 320 by 320 pixel Y and 320 across in X, Y, and Z. So So now, in terms of what they were assessing against, so it's not only how well, like, well, if you have a prediction or if you've, if you've done some analysis and predicted, where the surface is, they're going to evaluate you not only on how well the boundary is aligned to the ground truth, but also, is it a continuous sheet? Like, if there are breaks in between, that's penalized. And if there are holes in 3D, if there are holes or what do you call it, tunnels in there, that also gets penalized. So the what they're trying to do is um, they're trying to account for the fact that the surface should be as perfect topologically, should be a much it should be quite good, and it's not only about the alignment of the boundary. So they designed the score or the metric to assess based on these sort of three parameters: the surface boundary alignment, the split or merge errors, and topological correctness. So those are metrics, and the whole sort of idea reminded me of skeletonization in a way. Like you have a vessel or a neurite, and you run the skeletonized sort of filter, and you get like you can figure out where the middle of the thing is. That's sort of where this whole thing was what was reminding me of. But I realized it's not as straightforward or simple as the skeletonization. Um, and I wish it was, but then I guess there won't be a competition. So and I think so. As I was going about it, so what happens is when you're in the Kaggle competition, you can see some people will share the code and the notebooks that they have, which I found quite interesting because people are quite open about what they're trying, what they're doing, and I guess that's how everyone was learning as well. And majority of the people were stuck on, or not stuck, they were sort of focusing on the same backbone, which is NN unit, or which is a self-configuring sort of unit pipeline, and it makes doing deep learning quite easy because it's sort of like a package sort of pipeline. And Locke, maybe you're familiar with this, the NN interactive plugin that you're working with is from the same guys who developed the NN unit. So it's a self-configuring deep pipeline makes it easier to, if you have an image data set, you just need to make sure it's prepared in a way that the software can read it. So and then it'll look at the statistics of the image, like the intensity features, the number of data sets you have, and decide on what is sort of the best settings to use. So you don't spend too much time sort of figuring that out. A lot of the teams were using this. So essentially, they were taking the raw images and feeding it through this, and they were trying to find the best sort of settings. Sorry, best sort of workflow. So this is what they were using, and I sort of was thinking, I mean, how else can I want to try something a bit different? And I said, okay, how else can if you're feeding the raw images to this deep learning network, can you somehow sort of feed something which is a bit more feature rich, or contains more information? It's similar to the idea of if you use Vecca or the QPath pixel classifier, or if you used Elastic, you've seen those filters where they apply Gaussian, Laplacian, Gaussian, and you get these image features, right? That's sort of why the pixel classifiers work well. I was sort of thinking, can we have something similar, but instead of the classical machine learning one, because I could see Elastic wasn't working well, can we have like a self-supervised way of doing it, where you just give the image to like a self-supervised network and let it learn by itself to figure out what are the most important features, and hopefully without any ground truth labels. And this is what I sort of tried. Was I used this network called WNet 3D. So this is actually from a Napari plugin or software called CellSeg 3D. And the goal, they use this network WNet 3D because they used it for segmenting cells. And essentially the idea there is that you don't need to give any labels. You just give them images and it'll learn. And you say how many classes you want, and it'll sort of learn to separate your image into multiple classes. So this plugin it's quite user friendly, and it made the fact that it had a Napari plugin made it quite easy to get on to understanding how it works. I thought that is a big feature I really enjoyed. So this is like their uh, their documentation website. So you can see the Napari plugin, and they were trying it on these big brain. I think these are like light sheet brains where they're looking at the neurons. Essentially, they adapted a WNet network in 2D, they converted to 3D. And WNet, the network is two units stacked together as sort of like an autoencoder. And the idea is that what you do is you have to specify how many classes. You have to predefine that, and the network will then learn from the images and try to figure out so features and their separation. And you have to there's some parameters you need to uh, enter. It uses soft NCUT's loss, I believe. And essentially what it does is it tries to learn from the image to separate the image out into those classes you specified. Similar to the idea of Elastic, where you say foreground, background. But if you want, you can specify two or three classes and you don't do any annotation. It'll try to sort of figure that out based on the parameters you set. Or the default parameters. So the default parameters optimize to segment or to separate these circular objects or cell-like objects. But what I had to do is I had to sort of figure out how I can do this so it identifies sheet-like structures. So there was a bit of work involved in sort of like fine-tuning some of those features. And this is an example where I took the raw CT image, and that's on the left. And I specified three classes. So I was thinking maybe something like, maybe it could be like background, and then the sheets and any other features in the sheets. That is sort of my logic there. I tried two classes, then I tried three, and this is sort of the output on the right is what you get, and this is sort of what I settled on. And this is an example of where I had to fine tune like different parameters. So each row is like one parameter I tried. So left is a CT image, and the right are the images in the blue are the four different classes. So on the top you can see it's a lot more thinner structures, but it's starting to break the structures. On the bottom it's getting quite big or thicker, I guess. And at the very bottom, you see this like more blocky and blocky structures there as well. So it is sort of like a bit of optimization and a bit of eyeballing as well to sort of figure out, okay, it's not that I knew exactly like what the best one would look for, but I was looking at, okay, am I getting continuous features? Because the network was more optimized for blob-like features. I want a sheet-like features, essentially, or structures. So I tried a few different parameters, and look, at the end of the day, like my pipeline, the whole idea or the concept was, I take the raw data, I feed all the data to this WDET 3D, and I train a model on this, and the model becomes good at sort of separating the image into like two or three different classes. And then what I do is I take this concatenated, this multi-channel image, which is the channel one is the raw CT data. Channel two, three, and four are going to be those features I extracted from the network. I concatenate them together, and then I feed that into an NNUnet, which is the model everyone was using. And then I found it worked really well. And this is what I then ended up using to then, okay, can the model then be able to predict the center or that, the ground truth? So the idea here is essentially use this cells like 3D as a learned feature extractor. So this is the whole concept of what I tried. This is like in a nutshell, this is what I tried. Sorry, just gonna stop. Any questions about this? I don't know if I'm going too fast or going too slow. If not, then I'll keep going. All right. So so yeah, what it sort of took. So what I realized was because I already extract a lot of the features, I don't need to use all my data to train the NNUnet. Like I could just do it with half of the data. I could train it because I was already feeding the feature-rich information. Um, in terms of where I did all the training and stuff, I realized I needed to use large GPUs. So I used Vast.ai, which is you can rent compute by the hour. So I was also interested in learning how to, use really big GPUs sort of together, like you chain them together and do multi-GPU training. I think the largest I tried was 296 gig GPUs. And I used that to train, and that helped me train with large batch sizes. And once I trained a model, all the inference of the prediction was done in Kaggle in their T4 GPUs. So the compute what I did was in Master AI, and I put my data on Dropbox. So I connected. So I just had an account just for this because you're going to give your keys to rented machines, and some could be data centers, some could be even personal ones. So I don't want to connect anything personal there. So I just had a Dropbox account just for this. And and I use Gemini Pro for helping with some of the Python scripts and troubleshooting. I tried to use it for some experimentation, but I didn't really get much success there. I felt just writing the scripts and some troubleshooting is where it worked really well. So yeah, I tried I tried these different I tried different like data splits and different models. And essentially my final sort of solution looked like this, where I had different versions of the WNet I trained. So the first version, which I tried, was 20 epochs, a different loss. So 20 epochs. The second one I tried was a different parameter, 100 epochs, and then I fed that to NN unit, and one NN unit had like a different loss there, and the second NN unit had a boundary loss. And then what I did was I took the predictions from that, got probability maps and took 50-50 of those probability maps, and then there was some post processing involved where you cleaned up the sheets, and then you submit that, and that's literally what the final solution was. And uh, yeah, and I think what I realized was as I was going through this and learning through the competition, a lot of strength was like a lot of the people were sort of attempting this ensembling where you put multiple models together, and that's how you get a lot out of your prediction. And that a lot of people are sort of trying that, and that seemed to work really well. Uh, and once you've done that, then this is sort of like how the prediction looks. So on the left is the ground truth, on the right is the prediction that I got. Sorry, in the middle is the prediction I got in yellow, and the right is sort of the mismatch. So the magenta sort of shows the missed areas, and the green are the spurious regions. I'll show this to you in sort of 3D. So the image on the left is like showing how far away is my prediction from the ground truth image. So this is just for one sheet, by the way. Sorry, one cube or one volume. So the brighter it is, the more further away it is from the ground truth, essentially, the sheet I predicted. And in the middle is a GIF where it's going between the ground truth and prediction. And I think one of the things you sort of see is you can see like one of the things I realized was like my prediction was a bit thicker. And there was a slight drift on some of the edges as well, because it's a hard job predicting the exact center. So, and I think that's where some of the score went. Was I felt like some of the sheets I was predicting was it probably aligned. The alignment was probably all right, but the topological accuracy wasn't as great, which is probably where quite a bit of the score probably dropped. And on the extreme right is like the score distribution. So for this, I think it's a zero point 0.7 was the competition score for just this, but you can see the distribution between the different components, the surface dice, VOI, and topo, and you can see like the last two are where it was dropping. The surface alignment was probably really nice, but the accuracy was not great, the topological accuracy. Um, and this is again another visualization of okay, so I have this NN unit. What are the features it extracted? Like how does the last when it processes an image, how does the feature image look like? What are the sort of important bits it's focusing on? And this is sort of what that looked like, and you can see that it's focusing on different areas. So it's some focus on the sheets, some focus on the gaps between the sheets, some focus on like the bright areas, some focus on bigger gaps, smaller gaps, and so on. But I think one big thing was no other team really used the self-supervised pre-processing uh, for this, and it's possibly because the NN unit is probably quite powerful enough to learn from the image data. I think I probably was my solution was probably the only one that used self-supervised pre-processing. Having said all that, uh, the oh actually maybe yeah okay maybe I'll go into this. So what I did realize was you could do some training on Kaggle. I didn't really know that, so I probably paid for some of the compute that I may not have needed. At one point, I was using so the way you could use their calculate the metrics. So if you have a prediction and you want to know, okay, is my prediction high or low on the score? They had like a software or GitHub or some software you could run, but you needed Linux for that. And I was like, oh, is there a Python solution? And I found a notebook in there. Someone submitted that, okay, I could use for calculating metrics. But problem is I didn't really verify how accurate it was. And then I realized like some of the initial assessments I did was actually not correct, and I had to go and implement the competition solution itself instead of relying on a notebook. And it is not, and I don't want to. It's not a criticism of the author of the notebook. It's just that if any code you're getting, you need to really verify what if it's doing what it's supposed to, and that was a good lesson because I spent quite a bit of time on that. And a lot of people spent a lot of time on the post processing and not necessarily the initial pre processing like I did. So I think the one thing that stood out for me, like, was there was this very simple post processing that they did, where they literally all they did was applied a median filter to the probability map that came out of the NN unit network, and that that gave them a pretty significant advantage. Uh, and it sort of like made me think like this is literally in my wheelhouse. With me being able to do this, I should have explored these solutions, and I was concentrating a lot on the neural network aspect and all. But I probably should have called it at some point, be like, okay, this is all I'm going to get. Now let's focus on the post processing and really really delve in that. So this is one solution that really sort of stood out for me. It's literally a 3 by 3 by 3 median filter applied 7 times. Interesting to see how they. It'd be interesting to know how they figured out the seven. But yeah, but essentially, what happened was a lot of people would submit to the private, like they'll submit it to a test board which is visible during the competition. But at the end of the competition, they release the actual scores, is um, where a lot of the actual results like sort of showed. And I think this is the first. So the mine is in my solution is the one on the left, and the spinning solution is the one on the right. And I think interestingly, what I saw really, what is really interesting was I used an NN unit. One of the NN units that I used a 192 cube patch size, but the first place actually used patch sizes. They had multiple sort of NN units, and they used like a low res and a high res together. And from what I understand, that multiple resolutions extracted, like you can get features at different like resolutions, and that's probably where they got a lot of an advantage from. But again, having said all that, the post processing where they gained the biggest sort of advantage. So their post processing was seemed very super complicated, where they looked at the height map, and they actually use that height map to inform how to close some holes and in the predictions and get the topology right. So it seemed like a very complicated sort of solution, the post-processing solution. But it's interesting to see how they use the NN unit. And this is why NN unit is quite good, is because you only need to give it a configuration and it'll figure out how to do all this multi-resolution thing by yourself. And I highly recommend checking out the NN unit if you are interested in, doing a bit of deep learning based image segmentation, for example, and especially if you have sparse annotations. But everyone was using pretty much the same sort of NNUnet model, but various configurations. But yeah, I think investing in post-processing would have been a better payoff. And this is an example. This is not from the competition, but this is an example from I think this is from the 2023 challenge where they were able to read. As an example of how they, were able to predict the letters on a scroll and then translate it. I saw a couple of videos there where these historians and all were super excited to be able to see this and be able to read this. And this is like how like the outcome at the end sort of looks like. The competition which I worked on was focusing on one small component. Uh, I think what was really interesting was the amount of tools that came out of, like, not only of this challenge, but out of the entire sort of Vesuvius, like the whole challenge, the whole grand scroll prize. Like there's this viewer specifically for this. I think it's VC3D, a scroll viewer. You can even go to their website and you can view the scrolls in the website in itself and interact with it. A lot of annotation and segmentation tools. They even have a Nepari plugin, I believe, for this. And all of the data is open source. Like everything they put in is open source. Anyone can come in and work on this. And they also have like one specific big GitHub repository with all these sort of tools in there. And I believe they have the NN unit specific. They have some losses. They created some losses which target the problems which for this particular challenge. And I was just surprised by the amount of tooling they had. There are around 20 plus open source tools around this single challenge. So that is crazy. And yeah, And I think what was actually interesting was like it's not really that no new it is not a new architecture that really won the competition. Everyone used the same backbone, but having sort of like a single benchmark, that having a benchmark, an agreed metric, and the whole community sourcing was how they've been pushing through a lot of these challenges. And I found that quite interesting. And I've seen some Kaggle competitions in this space, in the biology sort of space, the bioimaging space. There's one recent one on cell tracking. But I feel like it would be a nice one to sort of nice sort of metric to sort of adapt. It's not or something to adapt is sort of this sort of having these data sets, having these metrics uh, would and community sourcing especially would be a good way to sort of push the field. And I mean, in terms of bioimaging, like having ground truth data, I think being able to have something like that would be great. A lot more ground truth data. Problem is and as core facilities, like with many of us work in core facilities, we're probably a good place where we have a lot of data. Problem is like, making it AI ready is hard, and funding is an issue. But I thought it'd be interesting to, think of, we could probably even think of running like student projects or collaborations, maybe hackathons, or maybe even Kaggle, like they have a research grant where you can apply for, but you need to have a well-defined problem. The point is like, it's not the solution, but it's like the data is probably where a lot of the bottleneck is, having good data. And I think one example is in the competition, they had to re-release the ground truth data, I think 2 or 3 times because there were some problems with the data, which I found interesting. And they were very open about it and they extended the competition time for that. There's open prizes. Yeah, that is really it. I'll stop there and maybe if anyone wants to ask any questions or, discuss anything about this, happy to. We answered that for 40 minutes. Oh yeah, rank wise it is 100.